of our ministry and where we are going to go for 2018. But before I get started with the vision and the mission, I do want to simply share with you some statistics from last year. Now, we know that you can't base everything off statistics, but my Siri's wanting to talk to me. That's hilarious. Go to bed, Siri. But you can determine if you're going in the right trajectory. And so here's just a brief harvest field report from last year. You'll see some teal green packets on your table. If you want to look at this, you can. It's our newsletter. Over 200,000 people heard the gospel last year from our teams. Numbers probably a little bigger than that, but I didn't want to lie, so we kept it very conservative. We have had 175 different teams go out into the world and share the gospel last year. We encouraged 4 missionaries founded having their mission station in Middle East. When I was in Scotland and England, I spent some time with them. I spent 4 days with them in the Middle East. Matter of fact, they're starting to implement, believe it or not, they're starting to implement open-air preaching strategies in witnessing the Muslims, believe it or not. One of the gentlemen that is there, he was one of the men I discipled before he left here, and they are beginning to implement having conversations, and as they have conversations, they just begin to speak loudly, and men begin to gather in, and they begin to listen to these conversations. Really, really neat. We were able to equip at least 40 lay people on how to share their faith. On the back table back there are 2 curriculums. One is geared toward open-air preachers, and one is geared specifically toward the lay person. So I was able to teach that curriculum in 2 churches last year. As I said earlier, we saw 28 babies, by God's grace, hopefully saved. In those 28, what we're counting is the mother turned away and said, I'm not going to abort my baby. Now, Melanie's going to share a story specifically about one of those babies. I so hate, I'm got to get past it, that we can't get the PowerPoint up so you can see this precious little baby and Adeline, the mother. But she'll share that story. 80,000 tracts went out last year. 75 Bibles went out. 4 people made a profession of faith, and we had over 560 gospel conversations with atheists, agnostic, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, you name it, we talked with them. Muslims, spent a lot of time reasoning with Muslims in London. There is a huge Muslim influence in that country. The people are oblivious to it, but when you go and you don't live there, you see it. And so there was a lot of conversations with Muslims. We did a lot of witnessing to JWs. I call Zach, he's the Jehovah's Witness relocation guy. Whenever he starts talking with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they just seem to take up their little cart and roll on down the road. So thank God for Zach and his ability to witness to JWs. And Seth Richardson, one of our leaders, he is an ex-JW. So whenever you get Zach and Seth together, JWs don't stand much of a chance. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. All right, so on to our vision. Gospel of God Ministries, we proclaim the gospel all over the world with partner churches and volunteers until faith becomes action, allowing the Holy Spirit to transform lives. So if you sat me down and asked me, Tommy, why does this ministry exist? We believe the proclamation of the gospel is what transforms a life. Whether you take that standing on a stool preaching in a sea of people, whether you take that having coffee with an unbeliever, whether you take that talking to your next door neighbor, that is what transforms lives. Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, that's our overarching vision. Now, how are we going to make this thing work? So our mission statement is pretty simple. We want to be able to preach and teach until faith becomes action. And preach and teach what? Preach and teach the gospel. So whether you are out in the street or whether you're in a neighborhood or whatever it may be, we want you, when you watch our videos, when you go to our social media post, when you see us on Twitter, when you see us on Instagram, when wherever you see us on social media, we want you to be encouraged. And I've had 2 people come up to me tonight and thank us for our videos and our content. So that encourages me that we are doing what we are trying to do as a ministry. So we have our mission. So now we have to ask ourselves, we've got a mission. Now, how are we going to go about fulfilling the mission and keeping in with our vision? So there are three things I want us to think about. We have to be able to shape. So we have to be able to shape the believer to such a point that they feel comfortable that they can now go out and witness in their neighborhoods. That's why I wrote the curriculum that I wrote. That's why we post the videos that we post. That's why we do the teaching here with the youth on Sunday night. We have our YouTube page. Hopefully our YouTube page is going to be getting a little more organized, but I do have playlists. If you ever want to go and have a teaching, you can go to our playlist and look at the 5 common objections to the Christian faith. It's me teaching through that, how to answer those questions. So we get people shaped with our curriculums, with our YouTube page, with our social media, with teaching in these churches, but then we don't leave you shaped. We want to take you out to share, okay? And Gospel of God Ministries, what we want to eventually serve as is a gigantic nationwide platform. Does anybody have a smartphone? Okay, so if you've got a smartphone, if you were to take your smartphone out right now and simply take your numbers and dial 22383. Right, Melanie? 22383. I think that's what it is. And then you type the word transform, text 22383. And you type in the word transformed, you will get an update to where we're going to be preaching. So now if you can't come out with us, you can at least pray for where we're going to be. I think it's a weekly update. We're not going to flood your text, but you'll get updated where we're going to be so you can learn how to pray for us. Eventually, I want this, and Sean and I were talking about this on a trip back from a preaching trip. We want to serve as a platform where people can come and find a preacher in their city, where no matter where they live in the United States, that they can come out and partner with and go out to share their gospel. Go out to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we shape people, we take them out to share, but then the last S, we want to be able to support. We want to be able to support the local church. So a lot of what we do is within the context of the local church. And let me share with you, the leaders here at Gospel of God Ministries, these men are here to a code of conduct. These aren't men who are just screaming and yelling at people. These are men who love Jesus. They love the local church. They love people. When you see Gospel of God Ministry videos, a lot of what you're going to see is convos. You're going to see conversations with people. You're going to see us probably bending down off our stool, engaging, talking one-on-one. You may see a crowd of people around us at times, but we're going to be constantly engaging by asking questions, letting the person answer. You may see a heckler from time to time just screaming and yelling, but that's because God's allowing him to draw the crowd. These leaders, they adhere to this code of conduct. They are members of a healthy local church, and that's one thing that the leaders at Gospel of God Ministries, we really agree on together as a team, that we want to be a part of a healthy local church that keeps us accountable, okay? Because that's healthy. If you can't be accountable to a group of older elders, then there's a bigger issue in your heart. And we've had to have some hard conversations in 2017 about that issue in our community as a whole. So we get people shaped, we take them out to share, and we support our local church. We do a lot with church plants with Open Door, of course. The Pillar Network, I go to a lot of church plants, and we help equip these young churches, and then we take them out to the streets to share their faith. But back up, long term for this ministry, this is what I want. I want a healthy evangelist in every church in America. So it's over 4,000 churches in America. But if we have a healthy evangelist within every healthy church in America, revival is going to break out, or are they going to pull us all in prison? You know, can you imagine having 4,000 evangelists out sharing the gospel at their college campuses, at their abortion clinics, at their sporting events, at their street festivals, and taking the church out with them? Do you know how many babies would be saved? Do you know how many people would hear the gospel? Do you know how many people are going to hear the gospel the next 3 days because an evangelist died? Do you know how many people are going to hear the gospel because Billy Graham is passed into glory? So the evangelists, we are just a magnet for the gospel. When people see us, they think about the gospel, and it's not because of us, but it's the calling that God has given us. And there are evangelists sitting in the pews today that don't even know where to begin to start to walk in their gift of God. And that's what the Gospel of God Ministries really wants to help do. We want to help equip the evangelist, but we're not only for the evangelist. We are for the layperson also. But the evangelist is what's going to help spur the layperson on to walk in obedience to sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I want to share we got about a minute left. I want to share simply a few stories from last year. When I was in Edinburgh, Scotland, we were there. It was raining. It was pouring down rain. It was cold. We were there being obedient. We were staying with some missionaries who were missionaries to Edinburgh, Scotland. And we're there just passing out tracts and preaching. And all of a sudden, this guy, he's driving by on his bike, and I hand him a tract, matter of fact, a God tract. And he says, "What is that?" I said, "It's a gospel tract." And he stops his bike, and he says, "I don't want that." I was like, "Well, I'm not going to force it on you." I said, "But, I am here from America. I came all this way. You sure you don't want it?" And he stopped. He said, "You're from America?" I was like, "Yeah." So he said, "Oh, I can hear the accent now, mate." I said, "Yeah." And we began to laugh at each other. And he began to tell me what he believed. He's basically a naturalist. Everything comes from nature and everything just kind of evolves. We're going from chaos to organization. I'm not getting into apologetics, but that's just crazy. Can you take a stick of dynamite and throw in a printing press and expect to make the Declaration of Independence? That's just crazy. So as I began talking to him about his worldview, he began to share with me some other views he had. And I just began to walk him through the gospel. Well, within 25 minutes, this gentleman was crying. And he was saying, "Tommy, I need Jesus." I couldn't do that in a million years. But God took a small farm boy from North Carolina, flew him on a plane over to Scotland to have this one-on-one conversation with this guy. And he went from being hostile to crying to making a profession of faith to hugging me and saying, "Thank you so much for coming to my country to share this with me." And ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't. And, when we leave people, when someone makes a profession of faith, we tell them this: listen, you need to get plugged into a healthy local church. You need to examine yourself to make sure you're saved, okay? You'll bear fruit proving that you're genuinely born again. If you see me send out an email, you'll see me constantly saying that. Pray that these people will bear fruit in keeping with repentance, okay? Because that's not a false gospel. That is clear as we can be as an evangelist, that we want to make sure they know what it means to be born again. My last story I'll share is Ben. He grew up in a Christian family. And I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was probably about 5 degrees at the moment. Wind was blowing. Had ice all over me. And we've been standing there a while. Peter was there with me. And so Ben is walking past. I hand him a tract. And he says, "I don't want this." I said, "Well, Ben," I said, where do you stand? What do you believe?" He said, I grew up in a Christian family, but I'm an atheist now. And I began just kind of what I would call pressing into his worldview. So when I mean pressing into his worldview, I'm going into his worldview and pulling things off the shelf and asking him, how do you reconcile morals with your worldview? How do you reconcile logic with your worldview? Oh, there's a bottle of truth. What do you have? Why do you have truth here in your worldview? Because everything is just chaotic. What is truth? And as I began walking him through his worldview, he began telling me, I don't want to talk anymore about this. And I said, "Ben," "what I hope you see is that how you were raised is the truth. Because Christianity is truth. That's not me being arrogant. That's just reality. God is truth. And because God's truth, we can know truth. We're pre-wired to know truth." And he said, "Well, I'm getting a phone call. I got to go." And he walked off. And I watched him walk off on that snowy, windy night. And I said to myself, Lord taught me one thing the whole time I was in Minneapolis, is God is providential in everything he does. Every person sitting in this room, the audio equipment not working tonight, God is providential in everything he does. Never forget that. So when you open your mouth for Jesus, never ever forget that he is sovereign in how he's using you and how you're obeying him. So here at the Gospel of God Ministries, in close, our vision, our mission, our values, we truly believe that. We believe that it's God's sovereignty taking us out, pushing us out, training people, equipping people. And so thank you for listening to me. One more thing before I close up and somebody else comes up, Sean comes up. We have a podcast. My wife and I, we bared our heart and soul to you earlier this week. We talked about struggles we had in ministry in the beginning. So basically, where Tommy screwed up. Okay, I have a dear mentor. He left me one time. He says, "Tommy, this is a prayer I pray. Don't screw this thing up." And I find I'm praying that prayer more every day. But where I screwed things up in the beginning, what we learned from my mistakes, and where we're at today. So the podcast, you can find it either on Google Play or on iTunes. It's called Truth That Transforms. I'm going to be interviewing people from Christianity. We're going to be talking about this. What does the gospel look like in the workplace? What does the gospel look like in the world? How can we take the gospel out? How can we take truth and allow it to transform people's lives? Okay, we have a YouTube channel. We have social media. We have all these outlets that you can plug into. Just simply type in Gospel of God Ministries, and you'll see the weird little logo with all the colors. By the way, that logo means that those dots that you see are us going out from the cross into the world. If you ever wonder why are there